Hello, everyone. This conversation has been a long time coming. It is all about whether Final Fantasy X-2 really continues the storyline of Final Fantasy X. In other words, is Final Fantasy X-2 really canon? As we know, there has been rumors of a remake or even of a Final Fantasy X-3 maybe. We don't really know what is going to happen, but there is a high likelihood that at some point, Square Enix is going to continue Final Fantasy X. And the real question is Final Fantasy X-2 in the blueprint? In the mental headcanon of each individual one of us, do we see X-2 as a true continuation of 10? This video is part speculation, part opinion piece, so none of it you should necessarily take that seriously. This video is divided into 3 parts. Part 1 is discussing what definition of canon is, and also a personal definition of canon. You can put what your own definition and criteria of canon in the comments if you want. Part 2 would be of whether Final Fantasy X-2 is canon in my mind. And then part 3, we will discuss Square Enix's attitude toward its property. Okay, so a definition of canon, which is from Wikipedia, so it's by no means necessarily official, but it sounds pretty accurate to how people understand it. It is the canon of a work of fiction is the body of works taking place in a particular fictional world that are widely considered to be official or authoritative, especially those created by the original author or developer of the world. So generally speaking, if the author or the original creator is attached to the product, then we see that as more special, as more involved in the general universe. But I don't always necessarily agree with this definition in that I think it is a bit strict. Even though maybe we have a director who is attached to it, there is still many other moving pieces. Star Wars is a perfect example of people maybe feeling uncomfortable about the new trilogy or the new trilogy compared to the original trilogy. And each individual person or a group of people may decide what their headcanon is for each of the different pieces. So even though George Lucas is attached, they might still reject the piece of work. In this Wikipedia article, it also calls out things that are non-canon or like non-canon TV shows. Examples of that is like SpongeBob or Simpsons, where the creators do not care about continuity. And I think that is a major piece in what canon is a care in continuity. So if the author does not necessarily care about continuity, then why should the audience care about it too? Interestingly enough, I've already been using the term headcanon, and in here it has a definition of headcanon as used to describe as a fan's personal interpretation of a fictional universe. And I might venture to say that I think that all canons, in a sense, are headcanons. The fans own the creation, not the creator. So we can do with it whatever we want, whatever makes us most happy. An example to me that I think is also very good is in the Harry Potter universe. I think that the first 7 books, it's pretty easy to make an argument that they are all canon. They were all written sequentially. They were all planned as being a part of one major story arc. But there are many things that have spun off from the books. So the books have its own canon. The movies have its own canon. But then there are works that have come afterward. Plus, there is J.K. Rowling's own tweets, articles that she's written on her own websites. And to me, I think that is up for debate, whether we should bring whatever J.K. Rowling said is about the book into the book. This also brings up this idea of death of the author. The definition of death of the author, according to tvtropes.org, is it's a concept from the mid-20th century literary criticism. It holds that the author's intentions and biographical facts should hold no special weight in determining an interpretation of their writing. I want to say it again, their intentions and biographical facts. So if If we're looking at this through a death of the author lens, someone like J.K. Rowling can't necessarily say her intention after the fact, and we should not necessarily listen to that and incorporate that into our interpretation of the work. That the piece of work stands alone, and additional context from the creator should not impact how we experience it. In my own literature classes, we have debated the death of the author. The reality is that it is a tenet of literary criticism. It is one lens that you can put on and you can also take off. And when we, each of us, encounter a piece of artwork, we, each of us, can have our own philosophy around this work. I have said fairly often that I try to kind of adhere to the death of the author. I especially do not take into account when the author says something after the fact. Even in the Final Fantasy X-2 universe, we have Final Fantasy X-2.5, which is strongly rejected. And even if the creator is saying new facts about the Final Fantasy X universe and how it works and how the Faith are created, I do not know necessarily that that is how the Faith were created when Final Fantasy X was originally conceived. So headcanons, I believe, actually empowers us to take control of the work and feel better. I know that in Final Fantasy X-2's case, there was a lot of resistance and anger and feeling of rejection. There was also a lot of people who absolutely loved Final Fantasy X-2. Some loved the story, some just loved the gameplay, some just liked the vibes. And there is nothing wrong with that. We should not take these things so seriously, which fandoms in particular tend to take things a little too seriously. As a small little aside, I was recently watching a rewatch podcast in which the original actors are making commentary and analysis about the show that they were in. And they can go into a lot of speculation about the choices that were made. But they also happen to be interviewing the people who created the thing. And the people who did create the thing, often when they were like, why did you decide to do this thing this way? And they would often say, because we didn't care about continuity. We needed to get the thing shot. So if they didn't care about continuity errors, then why do we care about them? And why do we tie ourselves into knots trying to make something work when maybe it doesn't? Maybe they threw in a couple of pieces of continuity and then didn't care about the rest. For example, Easter eggs. You might see in Final Fantasy X-2, for example, that there's a character named Shinra, and Shinra is hyper-technical. You may have even had a couple of lines of dialogue that hinted about a Final Fantasy VII. I know that there are speculators out there that say that Final Fantasy X and Final Fantasy VII may be in the same universe. My own opinion is I think that there might be some accidental continuity because a lot of the creators have overlap, and maybe they want to have some similar ideas that have to do with themes. Spheres are very similar to materia, but that does not mean that they had any time to consider or care about the continuity enough to make those two worlds truly merge. So the level of mental energy put toward that idea is more in the fans' hands than in the actual creators' hands. And it's up to us whether we're willing to participate in that. And at least in that theory, I don't think I really want to participate in that theory. So in conclusion about canons, different authors and creators have different care about continuity. There are whole committees sometimes for movie or video game franchises caring about consistency. And then there are things like The Simpsons where consistency is not a thing at all. And there is a whole spectrum in between. Given that there is a whole spectrum of care about continuity, how much did how much did Square Enix care about the continuity between Final Fantasy X and X-2? Well, it's a little bit gray. A perfect example of this might be the very opening sequence when we see Yuna dancing on a stage, and it turns out that it wasn't Yuna at all, but it was LeBlanc. I had made a video where I analyzed the lyrics of the song in its opening, attributing the lyrics as to her longing for Tidus. What can I do for you? I can hear you. Thinking about Tidus. But Many people in the comment section have pointed out, well, it wasn't actually Yuna singing, it was LeBlanc singing. Yes, that doesn't make any sense. But does it matter that it doesn't make sense? It seems that a lot of people's way of handling this is to make it make sense to them. So they might say that the lyrics actually do apply to LeBlanc. But LeBlanc is such a secondary character. I can't imagine that they would make the lyrics about LeBlanc and not about Yuna. Also, we don't see that mechanic with the grid ever again. Yuna, when she transforms with the sphere grid, is able to keep her own likeness. I think it's pretty easy to explain away this inconsistency. The creators, they probably had a bucket list of what they needed to have in that opening sequence, and one of them is to get into a battle as soon as possible. We see this in Final Fantasy X too, where Tidus takes up a sword and starts fighting Sinspawn almost immediately. So how do we get the characters right into the action? We see a lot established in just a couple of minutes about the mission system, about YRP, and we also get a lot about the tone of the game. I believe the creators of Final Fantasy X care more about the emotion and the vibe than they care about making logical sense. And I'm using this just as an example to just show that I think that they did not care necessarily about continuity all that much. I know that there is some explanation about how Dark Aeons were able to come back. I feel that the use of Pyroflies and old lore was very underutilized in Final Fantasy X too. And there's also the fact that we had multiple endings, and we are to accept the fact that the Tidus returning is the canon ending, even though there are other endings that even in video essays people have said that they have preferred. Other people have preferred that Yuna move on from Tidus, and that was a stronger character resolve. But then there are other fans who very strongly disagree and are Yuna and Tidus shippers for life. And there's things that we just don't know. I don't know when they came up with the multiple endings if they had always intended for the perfect ending or the 100% ending to be the actual true ending. However, in my headcanon, I think that it is. And the main reason for that is the after credit cutscene. And I have a video explaining how the after credit cutscene made Final Fantasy X-2 not necessarily a worthwhile thing, since Tidus does come back at the end of Final Fantasy X, and we have enough evidence to show of his return. So, opinion, he does come back in the end. Did we need to have Final Fantasy X-2 to establish that? Not necessarily. So I have another piece of evidence that I think you can argue either way about Final Fantasy X-2 being canon or not canon. The last mission has a series of cutscenes where they talk about what happened after the events of Final Fantasy X-2. And in these events, they discuss the Youth League falling apart and New Yevon soon going to fall apart after them. And in that, we can see that the events that happened in Final Fantasy X-2 was a very small window of time, and it kind of didn't matter. There was another adventure where there was stakes with a new sin-like creature, but then the creature was defeated and then life kind of went on as normal. So Yuna, also her personality somewhat reverted. She seemed a lot more shy, a lot more sweet. She wanted to spend time in Besaid with Tidus and forget about the time that she went adventuring. So it's very easy for someone like Yuna, if it was a canon, to say, oh, that time when I was adventuring with Pain and Riku, yeah, that was a fun little blip in my life, as opposed to a very big, meaningful adventure seeking out Tidus. But what do I actually think? Do I think that Final Fantasy X-2 is canon? But actually, my answer is yes and no. It was a fun adventure. I don't take it all that seriously. I think Final Fantasy X is a masterpiece and should stand on its own, and X-2 is like an add-on or an attachment that you can pop on and pop off whenever you feel like. But all in all, I think Final Fantasy X stands alone, and it does not need X-2 in any shape or form. In my headcanon, I can say that Final Fantasy X-2 is, for the most part, not canon. But how does Square Enix feel about Final Fantasy X-2? When they do a remake, are they going to just rewrite and clobber the event of Final Fantasy X-2? Or if they make a X-3, will they not even mention Pain or the Youth League? And I think evidence shows that yes, I think that they are going to ignore Final Fantasy X-2. Final Fantasy X-2 was a much less popular title. The last mission shows that they kind of wanted to revert Yuna's character. The Final Fantasy X-2.5 also kind of shows this intention. Future cameos of Yuna is always of her Final Fantasy X self. And while I can't say for sure that they will incorporate X-2, even if they did, there's not a lot to say about what happened in that. That was not the grand epic story that happened. That's not what Final Fantasy X is. Anyway, those were a lot of words. I hope that you enjoyed this discussion, and I definitely will read what you have to say in the comment section if you have any thoughts on this discussion, because this is really all a discussion. We are a community here, and I also stream on Wednesdays and Friday evenings, and I hope that you will join me. Currently, I am playing Final Fantasy VII Remake after just playing Final Fantasy VII Original for the first time. So it is a whole adventure for me, and I hope that you will join. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye! Bye!